in a locked drawer, inside a quiet room that almost no one was allowed to enter, Michael Jackson kept a song the world was never meant to hear. He wrote it in silence. He protected it with fear. And he hid it for years. When the lyrics were finally revealed, the people who heard them cried, because they weren't just words. They were Michael's heart. Why did he hide it? Who was it written for? And what secret about his life does this song finally reveal? This is the story behind the music that Michael Jackson never wanted the world to hear until now. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss our emotional stories about Michael Jackson. The night was still. No wind, no voices, only the quiet hum of the world sleeping outside Michael Jackson's window. Inside his private room, Michael sat on the floor with a small cassette recorder in his hands. The light from the lamp barely reached the corners of the room. Papers were scattered everywhere. Pages filled with handwriting, crossed out lines, smudged ink, words written and erased and written again. He pressed record. His voice came out low, barely a whisper. I don't know who this is for, but I can't hold it anymore. Then he began to sing. Not loudly, not for performance, not for perfection. He sang like someone telling the truth for the first time in his life. The melody was simple, fragile, almost unfinished. But the words were devastating. He sang about being a child who learned to smile while breaking inside, about applause that never reached his heart, about love that always seemed to leave. At one point, his voice cracked. He didn't stop recording. When the song ended, Michael stayed on the floor for a long time, staring at the recorder in his hands. His eyes were full. He did not label the tape. He did not copy it. He stood up, opened a small wooden drawer beneath his desk, placed the cassette inside, and locked it. Then he whispered something to himself that would remain his secret for years. They're not ready for this. And neither was he. But the song never stopped living inside him. For years, Michael would return to that room late at night, open the drawer, and listen to the recording alone. No producers, no engineers, no friends, just him and the boy inside the song. One night, he wrote on a piece of paper and slid it next to the tape. This is who I really am. Then he locked the drawer again. The world kept dancing. The world kept cheering. The world never knew. But one day, that drawer would finally be opened, and when the lyrics were revealed, everything people believed about Michael Jackson would change. Because the song was not about fame. It was about survival. The cassette remained hidden for years, but the song inside Michael never stayed silent. It followed him through airports and hotel rooms, across tour buses and rehearsal halls, through the laughter crowds and the loneliness of empty bedrooms. Sometimes, while hundreds of people were clapping in front of him, his mind would drift back to that night on the floor, to the quiet hum of the recorder, to the words he had barely been able to say out loud. And every time it happened, something inside him would tighten, not with fear, but with the ache of being known only by himself. In 1996, during the final mixing of a new album, one of the producers asked him if he had anything personal he wanted to include, something that showed a different side of him. Michael smiled politely and said no. Then he went back to his private room that night, unlocked the drawer, took out the cassette, and listened again in the dark. When the last note faded, he whispered, "Not yet." He wasn't protecting the world from the song. He was protecting the song from the world. Years passed. The industry changed. His life changed. But the drawer never moved. The tape stayed exactly where it had always been. Sometimes Michael would add new pages of lyrics beside it, lines that belonged to the same story, fragments of the same confession. One note read, "They think they know me, but they only know the picture." Another said, "This song is for the nights I didn't survive and the mornings I still had to." By the early 2000s, the weight of that hidden song had become something physical. On certain nights, Michael would sit on the edge of his bed, holding the cassette in both hands, staring at it as if it were alive. He wanted to release it. He wanted the world to finally hear him without the lights, without the choreography, without the masks. But every time he imagined the headlines, the interviews, the questions, he felt the door inside himself close again. One evening, after a long rehearsal, He brought the tape into the studio. He placed it on the console, but did not play it. The engineer noticed and asked, "Is that something new?" Michael hesitated, then shook his head and slid it back into his jacket pocket. "It's something old," he said. That night, he wrote another line on the paper beside the tape. They would turn this into a performance, and it was never meant to be one. Only a few people ever came close to discovering it. Once, a housekeeper cleaning his room asked about the locked drawer. Michael smiled and said, "Just memories." She nodded and never asked again. Another time, a friend teasingly tried to guess what treasure he kept hidden. Michael laughed, but his eyes didn't. "It's my heart," he said, half joking, half true. Then came the years when everything felt heavier. The accusations, the exhaustion, the feeling of being misunderstood by the same world that once adored him. During that time, the song became his refuge. He would listen to it almost every night. Sometimes he would cry. Sometimes he would fall asleep with the recorder still in his hand. And sometimes he would stop the tape in the middle and whisper, "I'm still here." In one of the margins of the lyrics, he wrote something that no one would read until much later. "If they ever hear this, they will finally understand that I was never trying to be a star. I was trying to be safe." By 2008, Michael had rewritten parts of the song. The melody remained the same, but the words had grown older, wiser, sadder. The child in the song had become a man, but the longing was still there. He recorded a new version late one night, alone, using only a piano and his voice. When he finished, he placed both recordings together in the drawer and locked it with shaking hands. That same year, he told a close friend something he had never said to anyone before. "I have a song that tells the truth about me," he whispered. "And if I ever disappear, that song should be found." The friend laughed gently, assuming it was poetic talk, but Michael did not smile. He meant it. The months that followed were filled with rehearsals, plans, pressure, and a familiar weight of expectations. Yet in the quiet hours, when the world finally loosened its grip on him, Michael would return to the drawer, sit on the floor, and play the song again. He would follow the words with his finger, as if making sure they were still there, as if they might vanish if he stopped looking at them. One night, he added a final note beside the tape. "This is the part of me that never lied." And then he closed the drawer. He had no idea that soon someone else would open it, and when they did, the world would finally hear the song Michael Jackson had been carrying alone his entire life. But the reason it was revealed and the moment it finally left that room would be more heartbreaking than anyone could imagine. The drawer stayed closed long after Michael was gone, as if the room itself understood the weight of what it was holding. Dust gathered on the surface of the desk. Light shifted across the floor with the passing seasons, and the small key that opened the lock remained exactly where he had left it, tucked behind a frame of a photograph no one ever thought to move. The house was quieter now. Not the peaceful kind of quiet Michael used to crave, but the hollow kind that echoes when someone who filled the space with breath and sound is suddenly not there. For a long time, no one touched anything. They were afraid of breaking something invisible. Then one afternoon, months later, a woman from the estate was sorting through paperwork when the photograph slipped from frame. The key fell to the floor and rolled across the wood. She stared at it, confused. The drawer beneath the desk caught her attention. It was the only one that had always been locked. She hesitated before using the key. Inside were 2 old cassettes, a stack of handwritten pages, and a folded note resting on top. The note was written in Michael's careful handwriting. It said simply, "Please listen before you judge." The woman closed the drawer and called a family. That evening, a small group gathered in the room. No lawyers, no press, no producers, just the people who had loved him. They sat on the floor where Michael had once sat, the same lamp glowing softly, the same walls that had heard the first fragile version of the song. They placed the older of the 2 tapes into the recorder. Michael's voice filled the room, younger, quieter, trembling with emotion. No one spoke. The lyrics were not about fame. They were not about music. They were about a boy who learned to smile when he was breaking, about a man who carried the world on his back and still felt alone, about a heart that kept believing in love even when love kept leaving. When the song ended, no one moved. One of them whispered, He was telling us the truth the whole time. They listened to the second tape next. His voice was older, deeper, steadier, but the pain was still there, more refined, more patient, more tired. The final line made one of them sob out loud. He sang, "If they ever hear this, I hope they don't look at me the same. I hope they finally see me." They sat in silence for a long time after that. Someone asked, "What do we do with this?" No one answered. The pages of lyrics were covered in notes, corrections, crossed out lines, small comments in the margins that revealed his mind as clearly as any interview ever had. On one page he had written, "This is a song I sing when I'm afraid to sleep." On another, "This is for the nights I don't survive and the mornings I still have to." They realized something then. This was not a song meant for charts or awards. This was a confession, a record of a life lived behind a smile. They decided to keep it private for a while. They were not ready to share him with the world again, especially not like this. But the world has a way of finding what it is not supposed to. Months later, during a private meeting about the estate, the existence of the tapes was mentioned. A producer who had once worked closely with Michael asked about them. The room went quiet. The producer insisted on hearing it, claiming Michael would have wanted the music released. They refused. The pressure began. Emails, requests, legal arguments about ownership, legacy, unfinished work. Each time the family said no. This was not business. This was Michael. One night, alone, one of them returned to the room and played the song again. This time, something felt different. The song was not asking to be hidden anymore. It was asking to be heard. A year passed. Then another. The world continued to tell Michael's story without his voice. The myths grew louder. The judgments grew harsher. And all the while, the song remained locked in that drawer, holding the version of him no one ever truly knew. Finally, the decision was made. They would share it, not for money, not for headlines, but because the world had never heard Michael Jackson speak, without a mask, and this was his chance. They arranged a private listening session for a small group of people who had known him well. No media, no phones, just ears and hearts. When the last note faded, one of the guests said, "This changes everything." The room agreed. The release would be quiet. No marketing campaign. No interviews. Just the song and the lyrics, exactly as he left them. When the news broke, the reaction was immediate. Fans cried. Critics fell silent. People who thought they knew him wrote letters apologizing to someone who could no longer read them. The lyrics spread across the world, not as entertainment, but as testimony. And the most heartbreaking part was not how beautiful the song was. It was how honest. Because everyone finally realized that while they had been dancing to his music, Michael Jackson had been writing a letter to his soul, and the world had been too busy to listen. But the last thing the song would reveal, the part no one expected, was still waiting to be understood. The night the song was released, the world did not celebrate. It paused. Radio stations that had built careers playing Michael's biggest hits went quiet before pressing play. Hosts spoke with unfamiliar care. No one laughed. No one joked. The first notes of the hidden song slipped into the air, fragile and exposed, and for the first time in decades, the voice the world thought it knew sounded like someone speaking from the bottom of his heart. Listeners did not hear a superstar. They heard a human being. Across cities and time zones, people sat in their cars long after the song ended, staring at nothing. Some cried without understanding why. Some turned the volume down because it felt too intimate, as if they were listening to a private confession not meant for them. The lyrics spread faster than any of his chart toppers ever had, not because they were catchy, but because they were devastatingly honest. Lines about learning to smile when he was breaking, about carrying the weight of other people's dreams until his own disappeared, about love that never stayed long enough to teach him how to keep it. One line in particular stopped people cold. "I built a castle from applause, but no one lived inside with me." Fans began posting their reactions online. Not selfies, not excitement, just quiet messages. People wrote about their own loneliness, about nights they survived only because of his music, about feeling seen by a man they had never truly known. But inside the Jackson family's private rooms, the reaction was different. They watched the world change its voice. The same commentators who once criticized him now spoke softly, carefully. Old accusations felt hollow against the rawness of the song. The public image of Michael Jackson began to bend, not into a legend, but into a life. One evening, Catherine sat with the lyrics in her hands, reading them again, and whispered, "My son." Those words were no longer followed by applause. They were followed by understanding. Yet the most unexpected response came from people who had never called themselves fans. Psychologists wrote articles about how the song captured the reality of emotional isolation. Teachers played it for their students to explain the cost of childhood fame. Therapists used the lyrics to help patients describe feelings they had never been able to put into words. The song became something else entirely. It became a mirror. And as the world listened, another truth surfaced quietly. Michael had not hidden the song because he feared failure. He had hidden it because he feared being believed. Behind the scenes, the family discovered something even more painful. Tucked between the pages of lyrics was a note no one had noticed at first. Written in pencil, nearly faded, it said, "If they finally hear me, maybe I can rest." That line shook them, because they realized the song was not just a confession. It was a goodbye. As days passed, letters arrived from every corner of the world. People shared stories of surviving depression, of losing parents, of being misunderstood, of feeling alone in crowded rooms. They thanked Michael for saying what they never could. One man wrote, "Your song helped me stay." A woman wrote, "I finally forgive my childhood." A teenager wrote, "I thought no one understood how heavy life feels. Now I know someone did." The world was healing itself through the words of a man who had never been allowed to heal in public. And then came the moment that broke everyone's heart. A former engineer who had worked with Michael in the late 1990s came forward. He brought an old notebook he had kept from a recording session. Inside was a list of song titles Michael had once written down. At the very bottom, in smaller letters, was the name of the hidden song. Beside it, Michael had written, "Not for the world, for when I am gone." That single sentence changed how people heard the music. It meant Michael knew. He knew the world was not ready. He knew his voice would finally be heard only when he could no longer be hurt by the noise. The song climbed charts without ever trying to. But no one celebrated the ranking. They spoke about the meaning. Documentaries changed their tone. Interviews shifted. People who had once chased headlines now chased understanding. And still, the deepest moment had not yet arrived. Because someone who had been in Michael's life when the song was written, someone who had heard it before the world ever did, was about to tell the story of why he truly hid it. And what Michael whispered the night he locked that drawer for the last time. The truth behind that moment would leave no heart untouched. The man arrived quietly, without cameras, without announcements, without even using the front door. He had been part of Michael's world during a period when very few people were allowed inside it, and he had stayed silent for years, carrying something that never felt like it belonged to him. When he finally asked to speak, the family knew it was time. They sat in the same room where the tapes had been found, the lamp casting its familiar glow, the walls listening the way they always had. The man held an envelope that had gone soft at the edges from age. He did not look at anyone at first. He looked at the floor. "I was there the night he locked the drawer," he said. No one spoke. He took a breath. He had just finished recording the second version of the song. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just sat on the floor with the cassette in his hands and stared at it like it was breathing. The room seemed to shrink around the memory. He told me he was afraid, not of the world, of himself, of what would happen if people finally saw him without the costume of being okay. The man opened the envelope and removed a small folded paper. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable. "He gave me this that night," he said. "He said, if something ever happens to me, you make sure they know this was the truth." He unfolded the paper. Inside, Michael had written, "I'm not hiding this song because it's weak. I'm hiding it because it's strong. And the world is not gentle with strong things that are fragile." Silence filled the room. The man continued, his voice unsteady. "After he wrote that, he locked the drawer, turned the key, and put behind the picture frame. Then he looked at me and said, "Promise me you won't let anyone turn this into something ugly." "I promise." He wiped his eyes. Before I left, he stopped me at the door. He said, "When they finally hear it, they'll know I wasn't trying to be loved. I was trying to survive." The words hung in the air. That same night, long after Man left, the family gathered and listened to the song again. This time, every lyric sounded different. It no longer felt like a mystery. It felt like a map of Michael's inner world. They heard the boy in the melody, the man in the words, the exhaustion in the pauses. They understood now why he had protected it. He was not afraid of critics. He was afraid of being misunderstood once again. When the man left, the family knew the world needed to hear this part of the story. Not for drama, for closure. They released a note. The reaction was overwhelming. People who had mocked Michael's vulnerability before fell silent. Even those who had spent years doubting him began to reconsider what they thought they knew. The song was no longer just music. It was testimony. Yet the most heartbreaking discovery was still waiting. While reviewing Michael's personal journals, they found an entry dated just weeks before the second recording. It was written late at night, the handwriting uneven. It said, "I am tired of being strong in ways that hurt. This song is the place I go when I want to stop pretending. If I ever leave this world, I hope this song tells him I was not a monster. I was a man who tried." Those words changed everything. People began to listen again, not just to the song, to his life. They noticed the moments he tried to tell the truth and was laughed at, the times he asked for privacy and was chased instead, the ways he had tried to protect himself with gentleness in a world that rewarded cruelty. The song did what decades of interviews never could. It made people care. But something else happened that no one expected. A group of fans organized a vigil in front of the house where the song had been found. No signs, no chanting, just candles, quiet, and the music playing softly from small speakers. A little girl stood at the gate holding a handwritten sign that said, "You were not alone. Now we are with you." When the family saw that, they cried, because the song had finally reached the place Michael always hoped it would. Not the charts, not the headlines, the heart. And the final piece of this story, the part that would leave everyone silent, was a message Michael recorded after the second version of the song, never meant to be found, hidden where no one would think to look. What he said in that recording would change the meaning of everything. The recording was not on any tape label, not listed in any inventory, not mentioned in any notebook. It was discovered by accident, tucked behind a row of old books in the same room, a small digital recorder wrapped in a piece of cloth, as if Michael had wanted protected silence from dust, from time, from the world. No one knew how long it had been there. The batteries were dead. The device felt heavier than it should, as if it carried something that refused to be light. They replaced the batteries in the quiet of the evening. The house already dark, the same lamp glowing where it always had. No one spoke. When the device powered on, a tiny red light appeared, steady and patient, waiting for someone to press play. They did. At first, there was only breathing. Michael's breathing. Slow, careful, then the soft creak of a chair, the faint hum of the room, and finally his voice, so close it felt like he was standing in the doorway. "If you're hearing this," he said, "then I didn't get to explain it myself." No one in the room moved. "I made that song because there were things I couldn't carry anymore," Michael continued. "I didn't write it for the world. I wrote it for the nights when the world felt too heavy, and I needed somewhere safe to put the truth." There was a pause, then a soft sound, like he was smiling without joy. I was afraid to release it, not because of what people would say, but because of what they might finally understand. I was afraid they would see the boy before they saw the man, and that they would use that against me. Another pause. His breath deepened. "I hope that when you hear it, you don't feel sorry for me. I hope you feel with me. Because I wasn't asking for pity. I was asking for honesty." The recording crackled slightly as he shifted in his chair. "I know the world likes its heroes untouchable and its legends larger than life. But I was just trying to live. I was trying to learn how to stay." He stopped speaking for several seconds. The silence felt intentional, as if he wanted whoever found this to sit with it. "If that song ever makes it out there," he said quietly, "please protect it. Don't let it become noise. Let it stay what it is, a heart on the table." The red light blinked once, then went still. No one in the room could breathe for a moment. It felt as though time had folded in on itself, bringing Michael's presence into the space, close enough to touch. Someone finally whispered. He knew. They listened to the recording again, then a third time, letting the words sink in, letting the shape of his voice settle into their bones. The message was not dramatic. It was not a farewell. It was a request. Protect it. They understood now that the song was not meant to stand alone. The message completed it. Together, they told a story Michael had never been allowed to tell in public. Not of fame or downfall, but survival, of the quiet fight to remain human in a world that demanded spectacle. The family gathered the next morning and agreed on what must be done. The message would be released with the song, exactly as he left it. No edits, no commentary, no spin, just Michael's voice and his truth. When the message went out, the reaction was immediate and unlike anything anyone had seen before. There were no arguments, no debates, no sensational headlines. There was only stillness. People listened, and then they listened again. Across the world, the song played in living rooms and headphones, in cars parked on dark streets. And after the final note faded, Michael's voice returned, calm and steady, asking for gentleness, for honesty, for protection. Many who had followed his life for decades said the same thing. They had never heard him like this before. Teachers brought the recording into classrooms and spoke about empathy. Therapists shared it with patients who had struggled to express their own pain. Parents played it for their children and explained that even the brightest stars are made of fragile things. Messages poured in from people who said the song saved them. Others said the message helped them forgive someone they had not been ready to forgive. Some said it finally allowed them to forgive Michael and themselves. In the days that followed, something remarkable happened. The world's language about him changed. The jokes stopped. The cruelty softened. Even those who had been harshest grew quiet, as if they were finally aware they were speaking about a real person and not a symbol. At a small gathering one evening, the family sat together and played the song one more time. When the message followed, they did not cry this time. They smiled, sad and proud, all at once, because they knew he had been heard. Outside, candles appeared again at the gate, not arranged by any group, not announced anywhere, simply placed there by people who felt compelled to say something they had never said before. "We see you." A young man stood among the crowd, holding his phone up to record the song, playing softly from a speaker. When the message ended, he lowered the phone and said to no one in particular, he was brave. Someone else replied, he was human. The song climbed charts again, but no one cared. It did not belong to the industry. It belonged to the spaces between people, to the quiet places where honesty lives. And then the final discovery came, the detail that sealed everything into something almost unbearable in its tenderness. While organizing Michael's belongings for long-term preservation, they found the very first page of the song's lyrics. Not the version everyone now knew, but the beginning, written years earlier in careful handwriting. At the top of the page, above the first line, Michael had written a dedication. It was only 3 words, for whoever listens. They framed that page and placed it beside the piano, because in the end, that was all he had ever wanted, to be heard. The house felt different now, not empty, not quiet, but complete. The room where the song had been born no longer felt like a secret. The air carried a strange warmth, as if the walls themselves were breathing easier. The piano stood in the same place, the framed page of lyrics resting on top of it, the dedication shining softly under the lamp. For whoever listens, people continued to come. Not reporters, not producers, not executives. Just human beings. Some came alone, some with children, some with letters folded so many times the paper had grown thin. They stood at the gate, held candles, played the song in low voices, and left flowers where the world had once demanded answers. The family watched from inside. One evening, long after the crowd had thinned, They sat together and spoke about Michael the way people do when grief has softened into memory. They laughed about his jokes, the way he teased, the way he could never sit still, the way he would stop everything if a child in the room looked sad. Someone said, he finally told his story. Another replied, and the world finally listened. Weeks passed. The song became something people turned to in moments of quiet, not for entertainment, for comfort. It was played at vigils, at hospitals, at funerals, at weddings, at midnight in bedrooms where people were trying to survive their own storms. Michael's voice, once surrounded by spectacle, now traveled in whispers, and with it traveled something else. Permission to feel, permission to admit the hurt, permission to be human without apology. Then one afternoon, a package arrived at the house. No return address. Inside was a simple wooden box. Carved into the lid were the words, "Thank you for trusting us with your heart." Inside the box were letters, hundreds of them, from around the world. They sat on the floor and read them one by one. A nurse wrote that she played the song in the break room when she felt like giving up. A soldier wrote that the message kept him alive during a dark night overseas. A mother wrote that her son finally opened up about his depression after listening. A child wrote in crooked letters, "He sounds like he understands me." They cried, but there were no tears of despair anymore. There was something else now, healing. Late that night, one of them walked into the room where the drawer had once been locked and sat at the piano. They did not play. They simply rested their hands on the keys, remembering the boy on the floor, the man in the silence, the heart that had been too gentle for the noise of the world. They whispered, "You did it, Michael." Outside, the city glowed the way it always had. But inside the house, something had changed forever, because the truth had been spoken. The version of Michael Jackson the world never saw had finally stepped into the light. Not the icon, not the legend, the man who tried, the boy who survived, the heart that kept believing. And now, when people spoke his name, they spoke it differently, with care, with understanding, with respect. The song no longer belonged to the drawer. It belonged to the world. And in that belonging, Michael had finally found the peace he spent his life searching for. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who loves Michael Jackson. If this story inspired you, remember, even legends face battles unknown to the world. Subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with someone who loves Michael Jackson.